I don't think I've ever been so happy to see consistent 90 degrees on the weather forecast. But I looked at the weather forecast for this next week and I was like, oh man, finally, something that's bearable. But I'm grateful to God that we've all made it here. And I hope that we can all be blessed this morning through looking at certain aspects of the story of Joseph. And the story of Joseph is something that's very popular. A lot of people have studied it. Most of us, I would say, have studied it since we were kids. Right? We've looked at the story of Joseph. We've heard about him. We heard about him being such a great figure, how he was so effective, how he was such a man of faith, and so forth. But when we actually look at the story of Joseph, there's a lot of question marks. At least for me, that I have. In looking at the story of Joseph, there's a lot of questions that I have. A lot of aspects of his story that I'm left wondering, what exactly happened there? For example, the first 17-ish years of his life, know nothing about that. Certain aspects of when he was under the rule of Potiphar, we don't hear much about that. We know that he prospered and so forth, but we don't hear details, right? And then when he ascends to the second in command of all of Egypt, I thought about it and I was like, why wouldn't he go home? Why would he stay there in Egypt? Why not say, hey, Pharaoh, I'm going to do everything that I said I'm going to do. I'm going to do everything you want me to do, but just give me a couple days, okay? I need to go take care of something personal first. I need to go home. I need to see my dad. I need to see what's happened with my family, see if they're even still alive. I need to go look for them. It doesn't say that he did that. Why is that? I don't know. Right? I don't know. And then later on, why after the 7 years of famine did he stay in Egypt? Why not go back to Canaan? Right? So there's a lot of these things that is just like, I don't know these specific things, but I think that's the point, right? That's the point, that when we look at his life, those things don't matter. Maybe he tried to go home. Maybe he wasn't allowed to. Maybe he tried different things, and but the little details in his life don't necessarily matter. It's the bigger picture that we have to look at. Why was Joseph so instrumental in the work of God? And today and next week, we're going to be looking at this through the scope, through the lens of a very simple thing, and that is a name. Names can be very significant. These days, not so much. People just kind of like name their children names that they like, names that sound good, something like that. But at this time, and at this point in time in history, names were very significant, and names were chosen for a specific reason. And this is what we're going to be looking at, and we're starting off with the firstborn, which is Manasseh. And as we looked at the opening verse, Genesis chapter 41, verse 51, it says here, Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." I don't know how many of us just read this and just say, yeah, okay, and don't stop to consider, what does this exactly mean? What is it talking about that God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household? Are we talking here about a memory wipe? Because God has the possibility to do that, right? To just block all of that from his memory. For him just to forget all of that stuff. To forget all the trauma he went through. I think that would be, a lot of us would say, kind of merciful of God, no? To just be able to forget all of it. To say, all right, you're here now, move on with your life, forget all the stuff that you went through, and just make the most of it. A lot of us would say that would be very merciful of God, right? Or would it be? Would it be merciful of God to do that? To cause him to forget everything that he went through? And I will emphasize that by saying most of us are who we are because of what we've gone through. And that's the point, right? But when we look at the life of Joseph, What was there to forget? Was it good memories? Was it bad memories? Was it trauma? What was it? What was there to forget? As we know, it was a lot of bad stuff, right? And so let's go ahead and start at the beginning of the story of Joseph. Let's look at the very beginning. And so we're introduced to Joseph when he is 17-year-old, quote-unquote, man, right? In our day and age, we wouldn't consider a 17-year-old a man. We would consider him a kid, a youth, a teenager, right? But in Jewish tradition, at the age of 12, individual became a man. And so he's 17 years old here, while his father is 108, which means that Jacob had him when he was 91 years old. Kind of old to be having kids, but nonetheless, that is the case. He is the 11th son of 12 brothers, and let's go ahead and meet these 12 individuals who played such a crucial role in the life of Joseph. First, we have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, who were the first 4 sons born to Jacob from his first wife, Leah. All right. Then he has 2 more sons, Dan and Naphtali, who were born from his second wife, Bilhah, or not second wife, I believe it's the third. And then he has 2 more from Gad and Asher through Zilpah. And then he has 2 more through Leah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And then the last 2, Joseph and Benjamin from Rachel, the favorite wife, the one who Jacob loved the most. I mean, when we look at this, 12 boys. That's a lot of boys. All right, those of you who have raised boys, that's a lot of boys. All right, that's a lot of trouble. And surely Jacob went through a lot of trouble in his life, right, with these boys. But I also think about it and say, wow, this must have been a very happy family, right? I know having two brothers, that having brothers is an awesome thing. Having brothers is a great thing to have, right? Having a sister is wonderful and all, I love my sister, but having brothers is something special, something extra special for a boy. And so I look at this and I say, man, they must have had a lot of fun. And because he was having children with different women, not, of course, a good thing, but nonetheless the situation here, they were probably kind of similar in age, at least not necessarily the exact same age, but somewhat similar, somewhat close. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's like 30 years between Reuben and Benjamin. We don't know, of course, but just an idea. And so with this in mind, they must have had a lot of fun together. They must have done a lot of things, been close maybe, or were they? I mean, with the first 10, I think they were probably pretty close, right? The first 10 were the ones that would go off for months on end to take care of the flock of Jacob, right? To lead them into new pastures, to help raise them, right? They would go for a long time, the first 10. The other 2, Jacob was a little bit resilient to let them do anything that was remotely dangerous because of the fact that they were the children of Rachel, the woman he loved the most. But let's look at a couple of aspects of Joseph's character. In Patriarchs and Prophets, we're introduced to Joseph and his character. And it says, Joseph, whose rare personal beauty seemed but to reflect an inward beauty of mind and heart, pure, active, and joyous. The lad gave evidence also of moral earnestness and firmness. He listened to his father's instructions and loved to obey God. Next paragraph says that the qualities that afterward distinguished him in Egypt, gentleness, fidelity, truthfulness, were already manifest in his daily life. Based off of what you've heard, do you think you would like Joseph as a friend? It sounds like a pretty good friend to me, right? Or would he be? Because we look at certain qualities, gentleness. We love a gentle person. Somebody who is true to principle. He is very a truthful individual. As we go back, you see he was pure. He was active, right? He was joyous. These are good qualities to have in a person, and they make a person very attractive to be around. But there is something about Joseph that might actually not have been so desirable for a lot of us. And what was that? It was the fact that he was truthful. It was the fact that he loved to obey his father. It was the fact that he loved to obey God. Why? Because then when you're doing something wrong and Joseph is there saying, we shouldn't do that. Don't do that because it's not right. He's saying, man, Joseph, go away. Let me do what I want to do. All right? I can see, speaking from my human perspective, right, that Joseph might have been a little bit of annoying. A little bit of an annoying brother, right? Always pointing out different things that they've done wrong, always being the good one, always being the right one. For humans, we look at this from a Christian perspective and we say that's a wonderful person to have around, right? Because he can call you out when you're doing something wrong, and that's great. But from our human perspective, it's like, no, I don't really like that. I don't like people who call me out when I do something wrong, right? And this is exactly what Joseph did. And how did the brothers react to that? We're going to see. Genesis chapter 37, verse 2, we see, these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. So, we look at this and we see that he is with 4 of his brothers, right? Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. He's with these 4 brothers, and they do something wrong. We don't know what it is. We're not told. It doesn't matter. But they do something that they shouldn't do. And Joseph does what? He goes and tattletales on them to their dad. How annoying of him, right? How annoying of him to do that. Why can't you just, be quiet, Joseph? Why can't you just leave us to do what we want to do? Right? Why do you got to go tell dad on us? And was Joseph doing this because he's just some goody two-shoes kind of kid and just like, oh, you did that wrong? No. We have to understand that, did Joseph love his brothers? Yeah, he loved his brothers. They were everything to him. And he could not bear look at them and see that they were going down a path that was wrong, where they would be at fault with God and God could not accept them. He couldn't stand to see that he had to do something. And so in his innocence, he goes to his father, right? He himself rebukes him and says, hey, don't do this. This isn't good. And they don't listen to him, right? He's a younger brother. Who's going to listen to him, right? And so he goes to his dad expecting that they're going to obey him, that they're going to reverence him. Because he's the father, they're going to listen to him, right? But they don't like this. They don't like it one bit. And on top of that, there's other aspects of his life that they don't like as well. Specifically, we look at the 2 dreams that he had. And in these 2 dreams, essentially the message is that his brothers, his dad and his mom, would bow down to him. And they look at this, they hear him, and they are so displeased with this dream, right? They don't like it one bit. They take it as Joseph saying, oh, I'm going to rule over you guys. And Jacob, not being very wise, not recognizing the kind of spirit that was brewing in the other brothers, he does something to kind of, I guess you can say, instigate their anger some more and hatred. And what does he do? He gives him a coat that was decked out with, I don't even know why. The Bible tells us a coat of many colors, but it was something that, when we look at the books and stuff, they make it just a bunch of colors. It doesn't really look very pretty, I would say. But I would think that Jacob gave him something that was very, very special. It was something that was great to look at, right? And they took this as Jacob saying, this is my preferred brother, my preferred son. The rest of you are nothing compared to Joseph. And they hated him for that. They hated him for his righteous character. They hated him for the fact that he called them out when they did something wrong. And they hated him for the fact that their dad loved him more than them. But there is one thing that they could not deny about Joseph, and that was that the Spirit of God was with him. And God gave them evidence that Joseph was somebody that God accepted. How do we know this? In the book of Patriarchs and Prophets, it tells us that the lad, Joseph, stood before his brothers, and what happened? Similar to what happened with Stephen, right? Similar to what happened with Moses. It says that his beautiful countenance lighted up with the spirit of inspiration, and they could not withhold their admiration. I don't know what exactly happened, but something was there shining. And Joseph appeared to them, and they looked and say, wow, this is something. But what does it say? That they did not choose to renounce their evil ways, and they hated the purity that reproved their sins. So they didn't give in to God's appeal to them, essentially, right? And I think that a lot of us, we look at this from an outsider's perspective and we rebuke the brothers for that. We look down upon them, but I think a lot of people would be in their situation as well. And we have to remember that. In the process of time, the brothers go off and do what they regularly did, and they went for months on end. And it comes to the point where Jacob gets a little bit anxious, a little bit worried about his sons, because they had gone to a country where it could be that something bad happened to them. And what country, what city was this? What region? Shechem, right? And what happened in Shechem? A slaughter. All right, a massacre happened. And so Jacob is looking at this and saying, oh, it's been a while since we've heard anything from them. Maybe something happened to them. And he does something that to him makes sense, but in retrospect, it's probably a very unadvisable thing to do. What does he do? Sends Joseph. He says, hey, Joseph, go look for them, find them, see what's going on. All right? And so Joseph, being a kid that loves to obey his father, he goes off. Anybody know how far he had to go? The inspiration tells us that it was about 50 miles to get to Shechem. He gets there. He doesn't find them. And he inquires as to what happened to them. And somebody tells him, oh, they went over to, I'm forgetting the exact city, I think Goshen, Dothan, thank you, yes, Dothan, and that was another 20 miles. So all in all, he had to go about 70 miles. You think he was tired? You think he was hungry? You think he was dirty, wanting a little bit of a bath maybe? By the time he gets to his brothers and he does find them, he's probably tired, right? He's exhausted. He's gone 70 miles. We don't know how long it took him, where he's been sleeping. Maybe he slept on the side of the road because he's walking, right? It's not like he has a fast chariot that can take him. And he finally sees them. And he's excited. He sees them and says, my brothers, it's been months since I've seen them. They're probably excited to see me too. He starts running towards them, and the brothers see him, and what's their reaction? It's been months, right? It's been months since they've seen him. You would think they were like, hey, our brother is coming, right? But when we look at Genesis 37, 19 and 20, it tells us they said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. And then comes the next thing. They start to dwell on the unthinkable. They start to verbalize the unthinkable because they've already thought about it, right? They've already thought about getting rid of Joseph in one way or another. But now they actually verbalize it. And says, come now, therefore, and let us slay him. Cast him into some pit. And we will say some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. I want you to stop and consider this, because this story is, as we know, it's very well known. We know this, and we accept it as something that is normal. But I want you to consider this. Put yourself in this situation and think of having the intense hatred towards your flesh and blood, towards your brother, to the point that you want to kill him, throw him in some pit, and then tell their father that, a wild beast ate him. That's a very twisted mind. That is a very, very twisted mind to get to that point, right? I don't want to focus too much on the brothers, but this is horrible. And sometimes we don't stop and consider this. Why is it that they have this reaction? Well, they saw something when they saw him. Patriarchs and Prophets reveals to us that the sight of the coat, the token of their father's love, filled them with frenzy. Behold, this dreamer cometh, they cried in mockery, envy, and revenge. Long secretly, what's that word there? Which is key. Cherished. Now controlled them. They gave in to that feeling for so long that now they're controlled by it. We all have thoughts. Certain thoughts come into our mind and we stop and consider and say, where'd that come from? Right? I don't know if you've ever had that experience. If not, you're probably not human. But I've definitely had those experiences where I think something and I'm just like, why is that even in my mind? Like, why would I think something like that? If we give in to that, eventually it will control us. In that moment, we have not sinned, right? The thought came into our mind and we say, I banished that thought in the name of Jesus Christ. And it's gone. But if we give into it more and more and more, it will eventually control us. And they have let it linger. They had let it fester in their hearts, in their minds, and now all they have is just bitter hatred. Now, luckily, thankfully, there was one brother that saw reason. He wasn't such a big fan of Joseph, but he saw reason, and he saw that this was not something that is good to do. And who was that? Reuben. And what is Reuben's proposition? He says, guys, y'all need to calm down, okay? Calm down for a second. You're talking about killing our brother, which is crazy that you guys are thinking about this. I mean, I don't necessarily like him, but like, come on, let's be reasonable here. Let's not kill him. He's our flesh and blood, right? So he proposes, hey, let's put him in this pit. Let's leave him there for a bit, and then we'll figure out what to do with him. His initial plan was for them to do that, and then he was secretly going to get him out of there, send him back home, right? And so when Joseph is approaching, he leaves because he doesn't want his motives to be recognized by the other brothers. And so he leaves. And what do? Okay, they get him. They agree with Reuben. He was the eldest, so they have respect to him. And they put him in that pit and leave him there. And it's interesting. The Bible says that they get him, they throw him in the pit, and then what do after that? They sit down and continue to eat like nothing happened. That's pretty crazy. That's pretty wild, the fact that they could do something like that, right? But let's stop and consider Joseph's perspective here. Let's consider, because I don't know if he knew that his brothers resented him. I don't know. I would think that he wouldn't be so naive to think that they loved him like he loved them, right? He probably saw some things that were just like, I don't know if they like me very much. But the picture that I get from this is that he is running towards his brothers, not expecting anything. And when we read in Patriarchs and Prophets, he approaches them and he sees on their faces this hatred, this utter hatred that can only be characterized by a satanic presence in each of them. He looks at this and he is shocked. And then they grab him and he's wondering, guys, what are you doing? Right? What are you doing here? And he throw him into the pit and he's there contemplating this, picturing their faces, picturing their hatred, picturing their words. How would you feel about that? How would you feel about going through something like that with the very people you love and admire? These are your older brothers. And I can tell you from my perspective that if my older brothers did something like this to me, I would feel absolutely destroyed. Emotionally, I would be completely distraught. And I would feel like everything, my whole life is a lie. And then on top of that, when they finally pull him out, it's not that they're saying, oh, sorry, Joseph, we're joking. We're just joking with you. We're not going to do anything to you. Just come up here, eat with us. He gets out of that pit, and what does he see? It says, as he saw the merchants, the dreadful truth flashed upon him. As they're sitting there eating, they see these merchants, Ishmaelites, passing, and they have this idea. And this idea actually originates in Judah. And he thinks, guys, I don't think we should kill him. Let's sell him. And then we never have to worry about him. We don't have to feel guilty about killing him, right? And we also get rid of him. So it's kind of like a win-win situation because we don't actually harm him, right? We just get rid of him. But to become a slave was a fate far more feared than death. And as Joseph comes out of that pit and he sees this, he lost it. He loses it. And it says, in an agony of terror, he appealed to one and another of his brothers, but in vain. He sees this and he's appealing to his brothers, calling out to them, crying to them, saying, guys, why are you doing this? What is happening? What did I do to you? And they're all hearing him, pleading with them. Some were moved. Some hear him and they feel kind of bad about it. Right? It says some were moved with pity, but fear of derision kept them silent. All felt that they had gone too far now to retreat. I can't imagine hearing my younger brother, my little brother, going through that intense agony. And me just being like, it is what it is, just got to keep going. And then, eventually it's going to be okay. This is a very traumatic experience. For both of them, for all of them, really. And the question is, how do you deal with this trauma? How would you deal with this trauma that you've just experienced? Would you give up on life? Would you have hope? Hope of what? Hope that you're still alive at least? That you're going to be a slave somewhere? That's not much hope. How would you react? What would you do? Spirit of prophecy tells us that for a bit, Joseph gave in to agony. He was an emotional wreck for a little bit. But before we talk about how he dealt with the trauma, let's look at some more trauma that he experienced, shall we? Because, one traumatic experience, I guess, is not enough for him. He has to have more, right? As we are introduced to Joseph again, Genesis 37:36, it says, and the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. So a prominent figure in Egypt, right? An important guy. This is a good sign, right? He's going to be serving a guy that's wealthy, that's popular, that's, going to allow him to be in a good situation. Let me, work for him, climb up the ladder, and one day, I can be somebody important maybe. I don't think that was in his thoughts. But as Joseph gets to work, as Joseph does what he needs to do, what does Potiphar recognize? As we look at Genesis 39 verse 3, it says that his master saw that the Lord was with him. How did he see that? How did he visibly see this? I want us to think about this. What is it that Joseph was doing that showed Potiphar that God was with him? Is there something specific? Was it just an accumulation of a lot of things? I want you to consider this, and I want you to think about this for your own personal life and ask the question for yourself, do other people see me and recognize that the Lord is with me? In school, not many people here are in school anymore, but in work, wherever it is that we go, whatever it is that we do. So Potiphar recognizes that Joseph is something special, that God is with him, that, a lot of things are going well with Joseph. Everything that he is involved in, everything that he does, it ends up into something good. And so what does he do? He recognizes talent and he says, even though this is a Hebrew, I need him, right? And so as we look, Genesis 39 verse 6, it says that he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. For 10 years, Joseph serves Potiphar. And in those 10 years, I don't know at what point Joseph climbed that ladder, and got to the point where he was in command of everything for Potiphar's house. But for 10 years, he served him well, right? Everything that he did, it prospered Potiphar's house. And those of you who are business owners, how would you feel about having an employee like that? I mean, in this case, it's not really an employee, of course, he's a slave, but still, like if you're a business owner and you have an employee that literally everything they do turns into something great, that through them, you are gaining a lot of prosperity. Would you keep him around? Would you appreciate him, right? How would you respond to that? You would be absolutely thrilled that you have this employee, right? So Potiphar probably loved Joseph. He loved having him around. I don't know if they were personally good friends or anything like that, but for sure Potiphar loved having Joseph under him. How did he repay everything Joseph did for him? By unjustly imprisoning him. What happens? I mean, we know the story. Potiphar's wife comes after Joseph and Joseph says no. Eventually gets to the point where she grabs him and he runs away, and she has his cloak in her hands, and she cries out and sees what she can do here. Let's get rid of him now. I can accuse him of wanting to do something horrible here. And so he's accused, and Potiphar should have killed him, right? If it was somebody who actually did that, he would have killed them. But Potiphar instead puts him in prison, right? It's merciful of Potiphar, right? How nice of Potiphar to allow Joseph to live and just to put him in prison, right? This is the best I can do for you, right? Joseph was for sure like, oh, thank you, Potiphar, for sparing me. I'm so grateful to you for just putting me in prison. No, of course not, right? 10 years. 10 years is a long time that you spend with somebody. Potiphar knew Joseph didn't do this, and yet he still did that. Why? Well, what did he care about? Did he care about Joseph? Did he care about all the things that Joseph did for him? No. He cared about himself. He cared about his reputation. He cared about his household, and saying, if I allow Joseph to get away with it, because he hadn't actually done it, right? Then I'm going to look like a fool. I'm going to look like somebody that's out of it. My wife doing something like that. So this is not a good situation to be in. Sold into slavery by his brothers, ascends the ladder in Potiphar's house, now thrown back into prison. Surely now Joseph gives into despair. Surely he sees that everything he has done has gotten him nowhere. Does he sit in prison, in his cell, if there is a cell, and just feel sorry for himself and say, woe is me, everything that I've tried to do in my life, I tried to make the best of my situation here in Egypt, but look at me now. God, where are you? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? Does he cry and complain about his situation? How many of us would? I mean, if I'm being honest, I would definitely complain. I complain about little things. Imagine going through something like this. I would sit in that prison cell and say, forget it. I'm just going to rot in here the rest of my life, and I don't even care anymore. Everything that I've tried to do, it's all turned into garbage anyways. Why even try anymore? Let me just give up on life, right? I think vast majority of people would give in that situation. But where do we find Joseph not long after? When we look at Genesis chapter 39, verse 22, it says, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. Whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. Where do we find him? We find him at the top of the prison. Now, why? Does that happen by chance? Do they just like the way he looks? He's a beautiful guy, right? So, just because of his looks, put him there. No. It's because of his character. It's because even though he had suffered so immensely, he was not giving up. Why? Because he wasn't worried about what happened to him. He had decided that he was going to serve God no matter what happened to him. He wasn't looking at himself. Even in that prison, what do we find in Patriarchs and Prophets? It tells us that, but Joseph's real character shines out even in the darkness of the dungeon. He held fast his faith and patience. His years of faithful service had been most cruelly repaid, and yet this did not render him morose or distrustful. Anybody know what morose means? Essentially, it means he was not in a place where he was just feeling sorry for himself. He wasn't just pitying himself and saying, what a horrible life I have. No. Why not? Why not give in to despair? Everybody that you've loved has failed you. Who do you have? Some prisoners, right? No. He wasn't focused on himself. He had the peace that comes from conscious innocence. And he trusted his case with God. I want you to stop and consider that, because that is a powerful sentence. Think about everything he's gone through. And yet he has the willpower to say, it's okay. I'm going to move on with my life. And I'm going to make the most of the situation that I have in front of me. I trust God. He's got it all covered. He's got me, right? I don't got to worry about what happens to me because I know that God will take care of me. You're in a prison. You're a slave in Egypt, and you think that God cares about you? You think that God's looking out for you? Most people would have that opinion, but not Joseph. He did not brood upon his own wrongs, but forgot his sorrow in doing what? In trying to lighten the sorrows of others. That's amazing. We're going to come back to that. He found a work to do even in the prison. God was preparing him in the school of affliction for greater usefulness, and he did not refuse the needful discipline. I go back to that where it's underlined. He did not brood upon his own wrongs. The word brood, it's an interesting word. And when I read that, I was like, what does that mean? Right? We might think we know what it means, but when we look at it, there's certain uses of it that means for like a bird to sit on their eggs, right? To keep the eggs warm. He wasn't sitting on his sorrow. He wasn't sitting there feeling sorry for himself, right? He wasn't sitting there saying, woe is me, everybody is against me. My own family betrayed me. The man that I served for 10 years betrayed me. All of this is happening to me. Woe is me. Everybody is horrible. I'm just going to give up, right? He was not focused on his sorrow. He was focused on other people's sorrow. Yet, what did he experience? He experienced some stuff that none of us could ever even dream of experiencing in our lifetime. And yet, instead of focusing on his trauma, he says, I have work to do for other people. I'm not going to sit here and feel sorry for myself while other people are suffering, while other people are going through some hard times. I would imagine not many people there had gone through as difficult a time as him. Or did they? There's always somebody who's gone through something worse than you. And I think that that's something that we must remember. Right now in our society, we're faced with something. We're faced with something very dangerous. And this comes only in times of peace. We're faced with this victimhood mentality. And you see it in society. All kinds of people going through something, and then just complaining and complaining and complaining. They go on social media, they record themselves crying and complaining about, oh, how horrible my life is, how horrible this person treated me at a restaurant, at a store. This waitress, was so rude to me. Oh, woe is me. Really? Get over yourself. Get over yourself. It's not about you. And that's the point of looking at Joseph's life, because we focus on Joseph and everything he went through, how hard it was for him. But we do a disservice to his story, because he wasn't focused on what happened to him. He wasn't focused on all the horrible things that happened to him, because he recognized, I don't matter. In the grand scheme of things, my life is something very small, and I need to work for God. You see, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3, Paul has something important to tell Timothy. He says, endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. Endure hardship. How much hardship are we willing to endure? How many issues are we willing to face and say, it's okay that this person was rude to me? It is what it is. I move on with my life because I'm focused on something bigger that I have going on. The word soldier there, I want to emphasize that. Do soldiers have the luxury of feeling sorry for themselves? Do soldiers have a hard life? I mean, none of us know the hard life that they have to endure, right? But when we look at it, go watch some videos. Go watch some videos on training that they have to endure. And ask yourself the question, would I be able to endure that? Specifically, go to and look at the elite soldiers. Go look at the Navy SEALs, for example. Do you think you would endure stuff like this? Do you think you'd be able to go through being essentially tortured? Right? I mean, you see the picture on the bottom right. They're laying on the beach with the water coming over them, essentially almost drowning, and they have to endure that. No, thank you. Right? No, thank you. I'm good. And guess what? That's why the Navy SEALs are the elite, because they endure. And why is it that they endure that? Is it for their own pleasure? Is it because, to be a Navy SEAL, I want to go around and tell everybody that I'm a Navy SEAL? No, those people don't stay. Those people don't endure that torture. There are videos that have surfaced of training that they have to endure, and people in society are saying, oh, how horrible. They have to go through all this stuff. This is not right. Yeah, the people in society are complaining about it. You don't hear the Navy SEALs complaining about it. Why? Because their perspective is on the right thing. They're not thinking about the stuff that they're going through. They're thinking of the mission that they have to get to. What is our mission? What is our mission? Are they doing stuff that's more important than what we have to do? I mean, they're important, right? When you need a very specific thing to be done in some faraway country, right? The government sends them to do it, right? That's important stuff. But is it really? Do we have something more important? And yet, how much hardship are we willing to endure in our training? Because they are trained to be ready for any situation. Any situation, they've already gone through it. So when they're out there in the field, they can go through it. Matthew chapter 24, verse 13 tells us, he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. In the NIV version, I like the word that it uses, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. To stand firm, to be planted like a tree beside water, right? That's the goal. And that's exactly what Joseph was like. He was a tree that could not be moved. Whatever happened in his life, he would not be moved. Now let's go back to Joseph's story for a little bit. he is in prison for 3 years. There are 2 individuals that are thrown into prison from Pharaoh, right? We know that the butler and the baker are thrown into prison. They have dreams. He interprets them. They come true, right? Joseph, when he is talking to the butler, he tells him, remember me when you go back, right? Take me out of this place, right? It's a little bit of hope, a little glimmer of hope. Hey, remember what I've done for you, right? Doesn't happen. He stays in there for another 2 years. And in that time frame, he does kind of let go of hope because he recognizes that nobody's coming for him, right? He's there, and he's been there for 3 years. But somebody did not forget about him. God did not forget about him. Pharaoh has some dreams, and he understands that they're important. He knows that there's a meaning here that I have to find out, but nobody's able to interpret it. And then the butler remembers, oh, I remember this guy 2 years ago when I was in prison, and he told me to remember him, and I completely forgot about him. And now he feels sorry about that, and now he brings his case before Pharaoh. And we know the story. Pharaoh calls him out, he meets with him, he gives the interpretation, and Pharaoh recognizes that this is the truth. And so they're left with the task of, well, what do we do in these 7 years of plenty? Who will lead us during this time? And to put a Hebrew, not just a regular Hebrew, but a Hebrew slave in charge of something like this, that's kind of, not a very popular idea or thing to do. But we find Joseph that in the end, Genesis 41:39 says, Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. And then in verse 40, thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Wow. Joseph's done well for himself, no? We find him that he's now the prime minister of the greatest empire that is in existence at that time, right? Egypt is not just some random place. Everybody knows about Egypt. Everybody knows that Egypt, you don't want to mess with them, all right? And Joseph is second in command of the entire empire. And Joseph doesn't have to deal with what Daniel has to deal with because nobody's going to question Pharaoh and his judgment because Pharaoh is as a god to them. And they treat Joseph kind of as a god as well. They all bow to him. They have to do these things. They have to reverence him, right? And so surely this gets to his mind, right? He looks at himself and says, oof, and look at me now. Look at where I am. I'm in a good place. And he loses sight of God? No, because he was never focused on himself to begin with. And now guess what's possible for him? Revenge. Revenge becomes possible. Revenge on who? We think about the brothers, but let's focus on the people in Egypt first, right? Because first, I think the first targets probably would be Potiphar and his wife. He says, oh, now I'm second in command of all Egypt. Guess what, Potiphar? Into prison you go. Your wife, into prison she goes, right? Now is my time to shine. Now is my chance to get back to them for what they did to me. Oh, butler, you want to forget about me for 2 years? You want to be ungrateful to what I did for you? Yeah, guess what? You're back in prison too now. Could he do that? Could he have done that? I think probably, right? He probably could have done that. But does he? Does he even think about that? I think not. I don't think Joseph was looking at his position now and saying, wow, now I can get even with all the people that have wronged me. Why? Well, there's something to do, right? Genesis 41 verse 48 says, and he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field which was round about every city laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea very much until he left numbering, for it was without number. He had a mission to do, right? He had a job to do. Pharaoh entrusted him with the preservation of the entire empire. And I don't think it was just, 50 people that they had there. There were probably thousands, maybe even up into the hundreds of thousands and millions. Who knows, right? Who knows how many people were in the empire? And he had the responsibility of getting them ready for the famine that was coming. So, he doesn't have time to worry about revenge. But surely after, then is his time for revenge, right? When Potiphar and his wife, when the butler come to him for grain, then he can say, oh, I remember you. Nah, you can starve. That was not in his mind, right? That was not in his mind because he let go of that stuff. Manasseh, he let go of all of that. He moved on from the trauma that he had experienced. But then in the process of time, guess what happens? You don't have to guess. You know who comes into Egypt looking for food. The ones who are most guilty, the ones he was betrayed by the most. Genesis 42, verse 5, the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. 10 brothers. Benjamin didn't go, of course. 10 brothers come to Egypt looking for food. They come to him. He sees them and he says, now's my chance. Now I will get revenge for them, for what they did to me. Right? Surely. Verse 9, Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said unto them, ye are spies. To see the nakedness of the land ye are come. Surely this is him getting revenge, right? He wants to get back at them for what they did to him. And for 3 days, he puts them in prison, accusing them that they are spies. Oh, this is perfect time for revenge, right? Just let them rot in there for the rest of their miserable lives. How long did he leave them in there for? 3 days. You were in there for 3 years. Surely you should leave them in there for longer, right? Doesn't make sense. Why would you leave them only for 3 days? Well, he was worried. He was worried for his family. You see, he wasn't doing this to get revenge. We're told by inspiration that he wished to learn if they possessed the same haughty spirit as when he was with them, and also to draw from them some information in regard to their home. Yet he well knew how deceptive their statements might be. You see, he didn't reveal himself to them as Joseph, their brother, because he wasn't sure how they would react to that. It's not that he didn't trust them. It's not that he it's not that he wanted to get back at them. It's that he wasn't sure what to think of them, if they had been transformed or if they were the same people. And so he puts them through trials. How long had it been since he was sold into Egypt up until this point? Anybody know? He was 17 when he was sold into slavery. He was how old when he went before Pharaoh? Bible tells us that he was 30 years old. 30 years old when he goes before Pharaoh. Now that's something interesting in and of itself, because here in the United States, how old do you have to be in order to be president? 35, right? The youngest has been Theodore Roosevelt, who was 42. Yet a 30-year-old made the head of the greatest empire at the time. That's something pretty spectacular. Not the head, second in command, I should say. But regardless, he's 30 years old when he comes before Pharaoh. And then how much time passes between when he meets Pharaoh and when his brothers come? 7 years, because the 7 years of plenty. And then the Bible also tells us that 2 years into the famine is when the brothers come. So then he is 39, right? 39 years old. 22 years has passed by. It's a long time, right? Surely he got over it. Right? Surely he let go of it. 22 years, that's a long time. Well, how many of us are willing to let go of something like that after 22 years? I mean, we hold on to stuff that's a lot smaller than that for a lot longer. And we have to ask ourselves the question, why? Why do we hold on to certain things that have happened to us for so long? He's 39 years old. He's a man, right? He had made his life there in Egypt. He had been married. He had 2 children at least, you know? But he tests them. He tests them to see their character. And after all the tests that they went through, we don't have to go through all of them, it says that Joseph was satisfied. He had seen in his brothers the fruits of true repentance, and this is what he was looking for, right? He didn't want to harm them. He didn't want to get back at them. He wanted to see if they had changed. Upon hearing Judah's noble offer, because it came to the point that Benjamin was going to be made a slave in Egypt, and Judah says, "No, take me instead." And Joseph hears this, and he tells everybody that's not his family, "Get out of this room." And then he breaks down, starts crying, and tells them, "I'm Joseph." That's absolutely spectacular. Imagine being one of the brothers. For 22 years, you had to deal with the guilt of what you did. When they went back to Jacob, was Jacob just like, oh well, it is what it is, let's move on with our lives? No, it says that he was unconsolable. His wives, his daughters, nobody could console him. And they had to deal with that for 22 years. The guilt that ate away at their soul. And now Joseph is alive. What? Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate that this is our brother. Where did their thoughts go? Ooh, now is his chance, right? All their ill treatment of him passed before them. They remembered how they had despised his dreams and had labored to prevent their fulfillment. Yet they had acted their part in fulfilling these dreams. And now that they were completely in his power, he would, no doubt, avenge the wrong that he had suffered. This is their perspective. For sure, he's going to get back at us now. And this is the human perspective. Revenge. Right? Revenge. That is what we have in our hearts. But Joseph shows us the character of Christ. There is no revenge in his heart. There is no wish to make them pay for what they had done. Instead, feeling that they had already suffered enough for their cruelty toward him, he nobly sought to banish their fears and lessen the bitterness of their self-reproach. Are you kidding me, Joseph? You're so weak. They had suffered enough? What did they suffer? What did they suffer? What happened to them that was so bad compared to what you went through? Joseph, come on, man. You have to do something more than this. You have to do something towards them. But Joseph looks at them, he sees in them the fruits of repentance. And he says they've suffered enough. And he seeks to alleviate them and to tell them it's okay. It's okay that you did that to me. I forgive you. I forgave you long ago. As time passes by, we know what happens next. Jacob comes and they all live in Egypt for a while, and then eventually Jacob dies. And after Jacob dies, what comes back to their minds? That same human thought, right? That same human thought. After the burial of Jacob, fear again filled the hearts of Joseph's brothers. Notwithstanding his kindness towards them, regardless of all the years that have passed by, conscious guilt made them distrustful and suspicious. It might be that he had but delayed his revenge out of regard to their father, and that he would now visit upon them the long-deferred punishment for their crimes. How little they think of him. How minuscule the power of God is within their minds. That they would think that Joseph is holding on to that. This is what guilt does. This is what happens when we're not able to forgive ourselves for the things that we have done. The message that they give to him, because they don't even go before Joseph after Jacob dies. They send a message, and it says that this message affected Joseph to tears. And encouraged by this, his brothers came and fell down before him with the words, "Behold, we be thy servants." Joseph's love for his brothers was deep and unselfish, and he was pained at the thought that they could regard him as cherishing a spirit of revenge toward them for maybe, 40 years now? Really? You think I've held on to that for that long? That does happen in humanity. And this is the point of this story, to teach us the difference between the human perspective and the divine. To show us the difference between how we think and how God thinks. How many times we come before God and say, God can't forgive me. I can't go before him because he can't forgive me for what I've done. How little do we think of him? We come back, as we come to the end, to the opening verse, which says Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh. Maybe you thought that we'd be focusing on Manasseh as an individual, but we're focusing on the message that comes from this name. And what is this message? It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's house. Did he forget about them? Did he say, forget them? I'm going to move on from them. They're nothing to me now. They're dead to me. And just move on with his life. No, this is not what we find, right? And when he meets his father, when he meets Jacob, what is the scene like? It's something that's powerful. In Patriarchs and Prophets, it says, thither came Joseph in his chariot of state, attended by a princely retinue. The splendor of his surroundings and the dignity of his position were alike forgotten. One thought alone filled his mind. One longing thrilled his heart. For so long, for 22 years, he's been separated from his father, whom he loved so much. And now as he reunites with him, as he beheld the travelers approaching, the love whose yearning had for so many long years been repressed would no longer be controlled. He sprang from his chariot and hastened forward to bid his father welcome, and he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Imagine witnessing this reunion. You know, we see reunions on the internet. You know, you can go and you can see people who had not seen each other for many years. They come at the airport and they hug each other. Everybody's looking, whoa, what's going on? They're so loud about it. They don't care, right? They don't care who's looking at them. They don't care what's going on because they're with the person that they love. Joseph doesn't care about anything at this moment. All he wants to do is hug his dad. And the image of the father of the prodigal son comes to mind. Except in this situation, it's not just the father that's running out to meet his son. Both of them are running towards each other. Joseph did not forget his household. Joseph did not forget his family. He loved them. And I believe he thought about them every single day. Not the things that they did to him, not how they had treated him so horribly, but longing to be with them again. Why would you long to be with people who hate you? Because they're his family. And he loves them. And that's what love does. As we look at this verse from a different version, it says, Joseph called the firstborn Manasseh, which means causing to forget. Because God has caused me to forget all the troubles I suffered at the hands of my family. Why is this powerful? When we are focused on ourselves, we will remember the hurt that we experience. But when we focus on God and we focus on his mission for us, all those things take a back seat. All those things fade away into the past. We let go of those things because we recognize it's not about me. It's not about the hurt that I experience. I should use that as fuel to live my life righteously, to know how hard how bad it stings when somebody is rude to you. So therefore, I'm not going to treat anybody like that. Allow the pain, allow the hardships to mold you into who God wants you to be. Romans chapter 12, verse 19 says, Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. The name of Joseph's firstborn son is a powerful message for us. There is hope in that name, that God's presence in our life can cause us to let go of the things of this world and to focus on his kingdom and his kingdom alone. I don't know what you've experienced in your life. Many of you have lived a lot longer than I have. Many of you have experienced things that I've never seen. You have lives that I've never heard of. Not too long ago, I heard of somebody, somebody was talking to me and telling them about their past, and I was just like, really, you? You did that stuff? It shocked me. I don't know what has hurt you in your life. I don't know if there's something that you're holding on to that happened maybe many years ago. Maybe it just happened this week. I don't know. But what you need to say in the name of Jesus is, Manasseh, let go of that stuff. Let go of all that bitterness. Let go of all that pain. Let go of it and focus on the higher calling. Amen.